Good evening. Good evening. Yeah, all right. And welcome to this very important dedication and significant acknowledgement to our local history as a city. A special welcome to the family and friends that are here from the Moore family, and to the special civic and nonprofit groups whom Jimmy loves, such as the Kiwanis and Historical Society and the Chamber of Commerce. My name is Aaron Adams. I have the privilege of being the city manager for the city of Temecula, but I am also privileged because I knew Jimmy Moore. And because I knew Jimmy, and he seemed to like me, I always felt, and I don't know how many of you feel the same way I do, but I always felt a civic pressure to give this city everything I had when I was in his presence. Yeah. To be clear, he didn't apply the pressure to me. It was self-imposed, and because I did not want to mess it up or lose the passion and the vision for what Jimmy Moore and others had envisioned as a new city and the high quality of life. And I'm not sure any of you would admit to these pressures, or these are just my own insecurities, but after all, this was the father of Temecula. I think it's important that I attempt to briefly provide some history about Mr. Jimmy Moore, who again is often referred to as Mr. Temecula or the father of Temecula. Jimmy is a proud vet. Jimmy Moore spent 21 years in the U.S. Army, retired as lieutenant colonel in 1974. The military took him all over the world, flying fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, as well as a 2-year stint and tour in Vietnam. He was a family man. The Moores met in 1953 while both were students at the University of Illinois. And Peg, I believe next Monday would mark the anniversary, 64 years. He was a businessman. Jimmy and Peg started a software company in Baltimore, eventually selling his interest, and after doing so, it was the move west to Temecula, or the area known as Rancho California. And of course, there was cityhood. In doing some research, I found a great article that was written by John Hunneman that I'd like to share a subsection from. And it reads, "Cityhood on the horizon. Talk of cityhood had been bandied about in the community since the early 20th century, when Temecula was a true cow town, dominated by the 85,000-acre Vail Ranch. In the mid-1970s, when most of the cows were gone and the development of Rancho California planned community was picking up steam, cityhood was again discussed. But it wasn't until the mid-1980s when businesses and new homes filled with families began arriving in droves, bringing them a larger tax base, that incorporation of the community finally seemed possible. Les Adam, who was a pioneer in the magnet industry, who had moved his company to Temecula in 1982, he sought to build an 86,000 square foot building to expand his business, but was frustrated by the red tape he encountered when dealing with Riverside County. Adams' committee raised money and hired a consultant to produce a study that analyzed the feasibility of incorporating a new city, which would allow local control and decision making. That first effort was for a much smaller city, about 8 square miles, Jimmy Moore recalled. It included mostly the Old Town area over to about Yanez Road. The study, which cost about $11,000, concluded cityhood was feasible. However, in September 1987, when the results were presented to the Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, the county agency that oversees new cities, committee members learned an additional study would also be required. The cost of the new study was estimated at between $15,000 and $50,000, money the committee simply did not have. Jimmy stated, "We had a wake in Adams' office to disband the cityhood effort," Jimmy Moore said, "but some of us said we wanted to keep the incorporation effort going." Then it was January 1988. there was a newly formed incorporation committee for cityhood, and they held their very first meeting. Jimmy was chosen president. This organization was about gaining local control, something we continue to fight for even today. And Peg, you served as secretary, and the group had about 30 members. Jimmy was quoted as saying, "If you missed 2 meetings, you were off the committee." And he went on to say, "We only wanted people who were serious about the effort." Then began a cityhood campaign. Approaching election day, a poll suggested that about 75% of the residents favored cityhood and incorporation. Voter turnout was 48% on election day, the highest in Riverside County that day in November 1989. After 10 p.m., most of the results were known. The question to incorporate passed easily, with 87.6% in favor, and the name Temecula was also selected with 69.9% in favor. On the heels of this major victory and year-long efforts, Jimmy was quoted as saying, "It was a glorious, historical night, and we got everything we wanted. This day will go down in history." The newspaper headline of the Californian the next morning read, and I have a copy of it here, it hangs in City Hall, and it reads, "Temecula, you're a city." Yeah, let's hear it for it. And this is signed by all 5 city council members at the time, one of which, of course, is the Honorable Peg Moore. While Jimmy, I know, would not want to be singled out for the individual credit, as there were certainly others on the committee and within the community that did amazing work to move this agenda, and they remained passionate about starting a new city. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Moore is deserving of being recognized as being in the front of this very important initiative that now allows many of us to continue living and working in a great city. Next year will mark 30 years as a city, and it would be my hope that generations to come will take the time to learn about the leaders that advocated tirelessly and helped organize and form the city of Temecula back in the late 1980s. I believe this tribute to Mr. Jimmy Moore is a good place to be reminded and educated about this local history. And with that, I would like to invite up Councilmember Jeff Comachero for some remarks. Jeff.
Thank you, Aaron. There's so much you could say about Jimmy Moore, and yet all you have to say is Jimmy Moore, and everybody knows. It's incredible. Aaron went through all the history, and my wife and I moved here in 1989. It was a good year for Temecula, and we didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about cityhood or incorporation. All we knew about is we moved here and moved into our house in April of that year, and in November, the very first time we voted in Temecula, we voted for cityhood. I'm not even sure we knew what that meant. We do now. But what I will always remember about Jimmy, I don't think there's ever been anybody who's been a bigger cheerleader for this city than Jimmy. It almost didn't matter what you wanted to do, whether he agreed with it or not, he'd give you that big smile, and you always knew he was in your corner. And maybe you had to sell him on something that you wanted to do. But he was just a remarkable man, and there are a few people who you come across in your lifetime that make you better. And Jimmy just made everybody better. I'll never forget that, and I will always be grateful to him and to you, Peg, for providing people like me the opportunity to have a city to be involved in. I never dreamed I would be a politician. I hope I'm not one yet, but I never had any designs on being on the city council or being involved in the city at all. I was kind of coerced into it. But then Senator Stone and I here went through a Measure C in late 1996 and then early 97 when it was actually on the ballot in March. And we passed it. It was the right to vote on taxes initiative, and it involved our park tax. I'm not going to get into all that because that's not what this is about, but it's so easy to get hooked on being a part of this city. And that's what happened to me and many others. And we all owe it all to Jimmy because he started it all and he wouldn't give up. Yeah. And because of that, this is what we have. So thank you, Peg. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jeff. At this time, I'd like to invite up Councilmember Marion Edwards.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, every journey starts with one step. And Jimmy Moore was probably the first person who was willing to take that one step. And in doing so, he really forged a path. He pointed us in the right direction. And even though that first step ended in a dead end, here we are today because Jimmy Moore is the kind of person that would never, ever give up. He was a take no prisoners kind of guy. So I'm sure when he said, if you miss 2 meetings, you're out, I'm sure there were some people who were out after that second meeting, I have no doubt. He was the kind of person that did not force his leadership upon you, but you wanted to follow him because he was so positive and he knew where he was going. And he shared his joy in Temecula willingly with anyone who would listen, and sometimes with people who really probably didn't want to listen. He was the best cheerleader we've ever had, and you can't have a great cheerleader like that. Peg, they made a fabulous team, and I think that's evident by the fact that she was voted onto the first city council. And Jimmy used to talk about that, saying, you know, he's Mr. Peg Moore after she was elected, which I thought was very gracious of him. But how fitting that we're here today. We need to remember those who brought us to where we are. And certainly Jimmy, supported by Peg every step of the way, is responsible for the Temecula that we know and love today. And my recollection is we bought property here in 1987. So we moved in 1988. So we were able to also vote in that election. And Tom and I remember reading aloud the names that we were to choose from. And of course, Jimmy also tells the story. We had Temecula, and then I believe we had Rancho Temecula, and then the other one was Rancho California, which really translates to Rancho Caca. It's Rancho California, California. So Jimmy was readily pointing that out to people, I think, before the election. He did not want to be known as the father of Rancho Caca. So luckily, we ended up with our native name of Temecula, and it's such a joy to be here today to recognize Jimmy and Peg for all they've done for our city. And all you have to do is look around, and aren't we all proud? I am so proud of this city, and to all of you, really, it's the residents who make the city, and that was Jimmy Moore. He was a resident who took the first step, and we joyfully followed him. So thank you.
You know, Marion may have had a point. The incorporation committee may have been like 50 strong, and a couple missed some meetings, and it whittled down to 30. I don't know.
It said at 30 and no more.
Okay. Peg, at this time, I think we all want to hear from you and give you the honor to share. Peg, as many of you know, also serves and has been serving on our Old Town Local Review Board, aside from also being on the First City Council, and remains engaged in the day-to-day activities of the city of Temecula. And we're grateful to continue to have her leadership and sharing this day with you, Peg. So
Thank you very much, Aaron.
First of all, I'd like to introduce my daughter is here, Marcia King, my grandson, Daniel King, and Jimmy's sister from Arkansas is also with us this evening. And I'd like to thank you very much. I also would like to thank all the Kiwanians who showed up, the members of the California Chamber Orchestra Board, the Historical Society Board, and all the other boards that he and I have one or the other has served on. And I also want to recognize John.
Honeyman.
No. Well, Honeyman, he's an institution unto himself that we miss. Now I've just totally lost it. Okay. And thank all the friends and people that we have known throughout the years. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Peg.
Thank you.
You know, Peg, this monument and tribute and this plaque that tells the story, I think, is going to be an obvious stop for field trips, for the History Museum, bring young people through City Hall on tours, on civic tours, and begin the education process before they even walk into City Hall. And we're pleased that he is the first and he is being honored in this way. And we have a small token, Peg, of our appreciation that we have for you, and I'll present that to you from the city of Temecula as well.
Do you need help? Oh, that's really nice.
Thank you so much.
And Peg, we know you can find a good, suitable place for that on a wall in your home. And you know what? Yeah, I think I don't know. Did we bring scissors down for this ribbon cutting? We have them here. Peg, could I have the City Council and Senator Stone join me up here? And Peg. Yeah.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
I like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I think it's good.
And on behalf of the City Council, the City of Temecula, we thank everyone for coming out this evening. I know we have some refreshments. You can stay as long as you like. Take some photos here with Peg. Peg's going to be here all night, right? No, she's got a dinner planned, I think. So we have a council meeting that we have to start next door. So again, thank you all for coming out this evening.